All right, so day 5, let's open a new file and then I'll call it functions.py. So a function, again, we said we can go ahead and call a function by you just typing it out. So let me drag this to the side. There you go. So first, let's see type. Let me create a function or a variable. Let's say my variable, and I'm going to call that 35. And my second variable, I'm going to call that hello. So if I go ahead and do type my variable, let's see. Okay, it will not help me out here. And execute that. Oh, this is not nice. Let me go ahead and make this bigger. Okay. So it executed, but nothing showed up. That's because I did not print it. So in order for me to do that, I need to print that and execute it. Never mind. Why do I have an error in here? There you go. So it's printing that it's of type integer, right? I think the first one printed, it was just delaying. And if I do the same for my second variable, that would give me, instead, this should be my second variable. First variable gets printed, and second variable gets printed as well. Run this again one more time. So it tells me the first variable is of type int and the second variable is of type string. So here is an example of calling this. But if I want to define a variable, or should I say a function, I start by using the def keyword. The name of the function, let's say enter input. Let's say that's the name of my function, right? After you enter the name of your function, which is unique and has to have the same, should I say, rules that you use for creating a variable, I'll go ahead and use opening and close parentheses. That tells me I don't have any inputs. We'll talk about parameters and inputs later on. A colon then means that's the end of the header. Now I get into the body. In the body, I want to go ahead and say user input should be equal to. Now I use that input function and type in, so I'm going to say enter value. So each time I run that function, it's going to execute that line of code. When that line of code is executed, I might want to go ahead and print it out. So if I want to print it out, what I'll do here is, see, type in print, entered, and user input. So now I'm printing that out. In this case, I'm not returning a particular value. Okay. So this is just a regular function that takes in no input. It does these two instructions. It prompts the user to enter a value. Maybe I want to go ahead and do something else with the value, right? Print the value, maybe. And after doing that, maybe I want to convert it, right? Say you want to convert it to a number. Convert to integer. Now I would say integer user input. So that converts it to an integer. If I went ahead and say I want to assign it to a particular variable to hold that value, then I'll say integer user input should be assigned to that. Does that make sense what I'm doing so far? Awesome. So we've done 3 things here. We have gotten the user input, we've printed out the user input, and we've converted it to an integer. We are not returning anything. So if you go ahead now, after creating this, you might want to call the function. If I want to call that function, all I have to do is to enter input, and then that function is going to execute. So let me go ahead and comment that, call or execute. Sure. Does that make sense? So now let's try to execute this function. Let me make this a little bit smaller. There you go. So if I execute that, it's asking me to enter a value at the bottom right here. Let me drag this up. My value then is 25. It tells me you enter 25. So this is not technically a return. This is an instruction that's executed. If I comment this out, nothing is going to be printed. Okay. So let me also go ahead and comment these out. So now I commented those. I have just my function definition and the call of the function. Let's execute that. Actually, I want to clear this screen. I don't like it to be too full. Okay, let's execute that. It's asking me to enter a value. Let's go 56. Nothing gets printed. But if I want to return a value, then at the end of my function, I need to use that return keyword. Now I can decide what will be the output. After you've done all these things, maybe I want this to be the output, an integer. I want you to enter a string and then I output an integer. Okay, so if I want that to be the output, then I'll go ahead and simply put that in there. Now my function now becomes, oops, let me undo that. What does the function do? Gets user input and outputs an integer. Does that make sense? Everyone, does that help?
Yes. I think, if I may, is it right to say that without the return in the function, you cannot call that function and assign it to a variable?
Exactly. So now that we have a return, if I execute this, even without printing it, it's going to print out this value which is returned. And then I can go ahead and assign it to something and use it as an input for something else.
Because the confusion I've been having,
Yeah.
Again, I have no clue in this stuff.
That's
It's that if I don't have the return within the function, when I assign it to a variable, it doesn't do anything.
Exactly. It doesn't do anything if you don't have a return in there. So right now, I can go ahead and say, assign this to a variable and say, this is my input. Let's see, input. And it's going to get whatever is returned from this execution is going to go in there. Okay. But now I'll tell the user to enter something. What does this function do? This function gets a user input and outputs an integer, which means this will become an integer. Okay. So now I'm actually calling this function. The output gets assigned to this variable. But you definitely need that return value. So there are two types of functions. I didn't want to get into this now, but that's fine already in there. A function that gives you an output usually has this return function, and that is known as a fruitful function. Okay. So that fruitful function has return value. What we looked at earlier did not have a return value. If I can spell correctly. So fruitful function has its return value. Otherwise, it would just be gathering a bunch of statements together that does not give you a return. Question, Fabian. You're still on mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Rob, I think I'm missing a point, and I'm struggling to catch up with my brain. And
okay,
you are progressing. I think I would need you to pause a little. So you see on line 8 where you're defining the function. I understood from there all the way where we are on line 19. Before we added the return thing.
Yeah.
There you said if you were to execute it, it would like print, even if you don't put the prints there. I was waiting to see how that would work before you add it, because I had a question there. Like if it can print like the output without you adding print to it, then there is no need for us to be using like prints in those areas, right? Like there are two functions now. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, I did skip that part because I commented it out. It's not going to print actually. That's what I meant to say. So let's go ahead and do that. So now we have gone ahead and prompted the user. We are no longer printing it. Oops. But we are converting it. So let's go ahead and call this, right? If we call that, it's going to ask us to enter a value. Let's enter 59. Nothing else happens. Does that make sense? So it doesn't print because we commented out that instruction. The only time that you have output from a function is when you're printing it to the console. But printing it does not mean you're assigning it to a variable. It cannot be assigned. This just takes in, let me go back to our slideshow here. So what this does is it takes no input. The function just does a set of tasks, right? And this set of tasks are task number 1, get user input, task number 2, convert it. In order for us to get this back in an integer, we need to return it. So that's the difference between a void function and a return function. There are sometimes that you might need to have a bunch of things take place without you having any particular output. But in that case, most often, if you don't have an output, you definitely need to have a print statement. So at least let you know that, okay, your execution is done, your function is done, and so on. Does that make sense?
Yes, I have 2 more questions here.
Go for it.
Now, if we were to add print to the value in line 22, will it print the output of that 59 now?
Very good question. If we were to add print in here, would that work? What do you guys think? Without us having this print in here.
I think it's not going to work. Now, this is just me thinking aloud. It's not going to work because when I look at the function, I see a box that you put something and get something out, right?
Exactly.
Now, in this case, it's telling me that there is nothing that it has to give out.
Definitely. So that's the thing, that's a very good question. If I go back to that screen I just showed you, we have no input, the function does stuff, and there's no output. When there's no output, you have a value of none. So if you see when I put my mouse over it, it tells you that's a function, it's defined as this, and the output is none. So if you print that, your output will be none. So let's execute that. It asks you to enter a value. The value is 99. The output is none. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. So at this point, where does that 59, where is 99 at this point? Like it's just stored somewhere in the storage, in the memory?
Very good question. Yes, it stops somewhere in the memory, and that's something that we're going to talk about very next. Okay?
Okay.
Excellent. I'm going to leave this here. We'll come back to it. And I really like those questions. Those questions are very, very important. So definitely printing it. This output's none. Output is none. Let me use capital letters. If no return type. So let's go back to our PowerPoint and carry on from there. Very good questions. That definitely solidifies what I'm about to say next. So let's go in there. We've looked at the basics of a function and the benefits. We've looked at how to create a function and how to execute it.